Hi, my name is Bob Hagen, and I teach field courses in KU's Environmental Studies program. I want to tell you about a very special place on the KU campus. If you visited KU's campus, you've probably seen Prairie Acre, but you may not have noticed it. Except for signs like this put up a few years ago, it just looks like a vacant, weedy lot surrounded by a ragged rock wall. But if you look closely, inside you can find an incredible diversity of plants. For example, here is butterfly milkweed. Almost 90 species have been recorded in recent years in this small area. Here is Indian hemp, and in the background, tall stems of eastern gamma grass. 200 years ago, the KU campus in Lawrence area looked very different. In our time, we can get a general idea of that long-ago landscape by visiting places in the Flint Hills, such as the Konza Prairie Biological Station managed by KSU, or the Tallgrass Prairie National Preserve. Grazing animals, such as these bison, and periodic fires keep trees and shrubs as a minor element of the landscape, which is dominated by perennial grasses and herbs. In fact, when this map of the campus was produced in 1883, Prairie Acre didn't exist. It was just a small, ordinary piece of the vast tallgrass prairie that covered Mount Oread. On the map, you can see scattered trees and the outline of Old Fraser Hall on the right edge. But by the 1930s, the original prairie landscape had been replaced by buildings and other human-created landscape features. Without fire and grazing, trees and shrubs grew to occupy unmanaged open spaces. Here's the Prairie Acre down in this corner here. So in 1932, a small group of people persuaded KU to set aside the last remaining area of native prairie on Mount Oread, Prairie Acre. It was one of the very first prairie remnants to be deliberately protected. In effect, it's a reminder of the campus's history in much the same way that historic buildings are, such as Dyke Hall, home of the Natural History Museum. Prairie Acre, in fact, is the oldest part of the campus. Over the years, the Prairie Acre was gradually reduced in size as roads, sidewalks, and other landscape features were added. But the core area still remains almost 90 years after it was established. In the 1930s, a simple rock wall was built around the prairie, using limestone from the Mount Oread Formation. Most likely, these rocks were excavated in the construction of campus buildings along Jayhawk Boulevard, just up the hill from Prairie Acre. So the wall itself is another reminder of campus history. But like any historic building, a historic landscape also needs to be maintained. After years of being mostly neglected, except for periodic mowing, Prairie Acre had lost much of its diversity. Woody plants and non-native species began to establish there. So in 2014, students in the Environmental Studies program began an effort to restore Prairie Acre. You'll hear much more about prairie restoration in the presentation by Courtney Masterson, so I won't go into details here. Students and volunteers collected native seeds, started them in a greenhouse, then planted them to reintroduce some of the species that had disappeared from the site. The aspect that I have been most directly involved with is monitoring. With the help of students in my summer field ecology course at KU, for the past 6 years we have been identifying, counting, and measuring plants in Prairie Acre. Our goal is to track changes in the vegetation over time, to learn whether the restoration efforts are succeeding. Unfortunately, in 2020, COVID-19 forced me to cancel my in-person summer class, so I had to do all the monitoring work myself this year. This section of Prairie Acre clearly illustrates one of the major threats to the native herbs and grasses. The area is dominated by sumac, a woody shrub which can take over a small prairie remnant. The grass in the background is Johnson grass, a wild cousin of sorghum that can also take over. Here I am setting up one of the small 1 meter square monitoring plots that we use to record the vegetation. You can still find native plants in there, the native herbaceous plants. Here is a little Starry Campion, which has wonderfully attractive white fringed flowers. We can't bring in a herd of bison to graze Prairie Acre, and conditions have to be just right in order to have a controlled burn of the site. The campus landscape manager had his staff mow the area in early July after I finished the monitoring work. They also removed this ash tree, which had begun growing in the rock wall sometime in the 1950s. The shade and seeds it produced were harmful to the native grasses and herbs. The decision to remove this ash tree was made easier because it was dying as a result of the invading emerald ash borer beetle. At this point, in mid-July, the area looks pretty bleak. Fortunately, the native perennial grasses and herbs are adapted to this kind of disturbance. These plants may not flower this year, but they will have an advantage in competing with the alien and woody species in the future. This is a long-term project. Our goal is for Prairie Acre to thrive for the next 90 years and beyond.